Namaskar, Nileshok, with another session of Dr. No Shorts. This would be Dr. No Shorts number 13. And in this session, we are going to discuss seismology evidence related to flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka, and therefore from the geographical region of the state of Gujarat in India. All right, so let's get there. Now, what kind of seismology evidence do we see? Or how does a seismology evidence looks like? It comes in many forms, of course. A common form, a common evidence that seismologists are looking for is what is called a fault line, fault line in the land. And if we are looking for historical instances, then actually it does get challenging because one earthquake, for example, it will create certain evidence, but it may get intermixed with another evidence, especially if it happens at the same location. And even earthquake happening at some other location may actually contaminate in some form the existing evidence of a previous earthquake at some other location. In spite of these limitations, it's impressive the kind of evidence that gets captured. And especially because of the fault lines, some organic material at that time, and if that was the surface, or even if it wasn't a surface, but where the fault occurs, if a organic material of that time gets trapped there, then of course we can use it and use it using different techniques to estimate the timing of that fault line and therefore a seismological event. The work that I'm showing here in the context of Gujarat, Dwarka. Now this study was not done with Dwarka as the focus, Dwarka in mind. In fact, this was done in the context of 2001 earthquake, the big earthquake that happened in the Bhuj area of Gujarat. And so in that context, when they are studying possibly for a potential earthquakes and which areas might suffer and so on, in that context, this study was done. But as it happens, it also helps us understand the different warnings that we hear in the traditional ancient narrations. I don't know exactly where this occurs, so I have called it traditional narrations or possibly the narrations occurring in Purana. But I have heard this many times. I don't know if you have, and if you know of a specific reference occurring in any Purana, please do bring it to my attention, because I have heard this multiple times, but I don't know any specific reference. At least nothing comes to my mind, no specific reference comes to my mind. This is a paper by C.P. Rajendran. Okay, he used to work in Trivandrum before, also at the Indian Institute of Sciences and so on. Again, this particular research team has nothing to do with Krishna's Dwarka. That's not on their mind. I want to make this clear. And therefore, when I hear people saying, Nileshji, why the Indian government doesn't do archaeology research about Dwarka or some other place? I mean, directionally, that statement, that request is correct, but I think it's only 5% correct. 95% is based on deep ignorance of how archaeology research happens. You don't just suddenly wake up one day and say, you know what, let me start digging in the oceanic area of Gujarat and let's look for Dwarka. No, those people who ask for such things have absolutely no idea how much efforts are required, the amount of money required in archaeology. But frankly, I want to add something, because somebody will say, but come on, that is a duty of a government, or Krishna's historicity is so important that we should still do it. Again, a totally careless, casual, without any focused understanding, somebody digging something somewhere. Actually, many of our archaeologists have done it over the last 100 years. Okay. And sometimes we have found something useful. I mean, again, in research field, those of you who are savvy and who have been there for a while know especially in academia, not so much in the industrial research, because industrial research is not that gung-ho on the publishing unless they're going to get some mileage out of it. But in academia, it's almost given that if you are going to do some study, that irrespective of the outcome, whether it is fascinating, original or not, you're going to find a way to publish it. In fact, that's the other problem with it. So there is a flood of these publications. Most of them are also useless. Okay. For example, like I was involved in many areas within academia, but outside academia, and again in academia and outside academia. And I'll just give you one example. Say you might have heard the word SANS and SACS, small angle neutron scattering, small angle X-ray scattering, and so on. And I used to work with polymer blends, block copolymers, copolymers, and so on. And so what happens is, at least this is going back 20 plus years, 30 years. When we would have some samples, and we have to study them, say using SACS or SANS, like small angle neutron scattering, small angle X-ray scattering. Now the number of facilities have grown up substantially, and even then it's a costly affair. But that time, literally, like I remember in North America, we would have, at least I remember that I could access easily in an academic setting, say 20 facilities or 10 facilities across North America. And then it takes time, you have to calibrate and so on and so forth. So it is a few days long affair. So we would have to block the time. The money is involved. You have to sometimes send the samples, or if you want to be there, you have to travel to that destination where the lab is, or whoever that has labs and expertise. And then, so the samples are presented, then we do this SACS or SANS. And now, whatever the results come out, guess what? We have waited for so long, we have spent money, and no matter what it says, we are going to publish it in some form. Okay, so the reason I mentioned that is, therefore, someone does some archaeology dig, then they publish it. And many times they try to draw utterly illogical, utterly unscientific, utterly foolish inferences, because a lot of money has gone into it, and now they have to show some output for that work, for that money spent. So be very careful, even as individual citizen, a Indian citizen, world citizen, as a Hindu, what you ask for. Sometimes your wish may get fulfilled, but basically not in the desired way. So my point is, the study is done for a specific purpose, but if you are smart enough, you can actually data mine such information. All the data that I'm sharing with you for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE, I think I've shared like 10 specific events, 10 specific data points around the world so far. And I'm going to share, possibly, I don't know, at some point I have to stop, but maybe additional 10, I can show that. That's how the rich evidence is for 5525 BCE. My point is, none of that evidence came because somebody was specifically studying something for the flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka. Okay, and therefore you can be focusing on a specific year. You focus on a broad timeline, and that's when you know whether the specific evidence is significant or not. Anyways, back to the seismology evidence. So it's amazing. I didn't know that, and this is not my expertise at all. That the seismology, the fault line data, actually you can track it, and it goes back to, I'm going to present right from this paper, 10,000 years of data. Past 10,000 years, practically entire Holocene. Okay, so let's look at it. And specifically in the context of Gujarat, and remember our date, 5525 BCE. Okay, what I'm showing you in this map, so this is from CP Rajendran's paper. This map of Gujarat is also from that paper, so you can relate to portion of India. Here, what I did is I took some of these locations, for example, Lothal and Motibaru and Budamora and Kathana and the Dwarka. By Dwarka, we are not referring to Krishna's Dwarka of 7,500 years ago. We are referring to today's what we call Dwarka, where there is a Krishna Mandir. But from this Dwarka, if you start driving towards Somnath here along the coastline, you are going to come across another place called Mula Dwarka. And if you come to Somnath and continue to drive further south, you are going to come at another Mula Dwarka. And these are all proxies for the original Krishna's Dwarka, which is now inside the ocean. Okay, and it should be, if you go from here, my assertion is that it is somewhere here. Okay, down there. Now, if somebody wants to do archaeology dig, hey, I will be delighted. But I don't even, so it's not like, but I don't see the need for it. Or I would say, unless the return on investment is justified, or we find some very creative, ingenious ways to do it, we should not waste money. Actually, we have enough data. That is not to stop anyone from doing it. Just don't ask me, do not involve me and saying, hey, go to the government. No, again, if somebody asks that, the person is so naive. The person has no idea how government works, and what I do, where my time is spent, where my sustenance comes from. People have no idea, okay, how much time is spent on this. So please don't give just a useless advice, okay? Do something on your own. Petition to the government, do study, become conversant with the scientific acumen, so you know what to even ask for. All right, quick data from seismology. These are lab numbers. We don't need to look at it. The area to focus, you can look at material. If that you have some expertise there, that's great. But the C14 age, carbon age, this is basically what we call carbon dating. Okay. And remember, the carbon dating, you get that raw data, and it needs to be adjusted for the calibrated carbon dating. Okay. I'll not go into the details. I have done one episode on calibration for carbon dating using the tree rings and so on and so forth. Anyways, so look at this second last column. The last column is the location. The second last column is where you get the dating based on the calibrated one. Okay, calculated, they will call it. And 2 sigma, which means what? It's a very broad time interval. Okay, so don't just look at that one, the exact year, and say, oh, well, hold on, does this match? Okay, that's actually true for carbon dating. It's usually over a range. Okay, sometimes the range is given, other times the range is not given. But if you know the variation, then you know how to look at the 2 sigma. All you need is a basic knowledge of statistics. But again, remember, as Mark Twain said, damn lies in statistics. Statistics, unfortunately, can be extremely manipulated. In fact, I spent my whole career teaching people how not to know statistics, but how to be a statistical thinker. In fact, I used to teach a course in corporate called Statistical Thinker. Okay, how to think with the background of knowledge of statistics, not use statistics to fool people or fool yourself. Okay, anyways, so what do you see here? Quickly, going back to 10,000 years, we have the data set. Here we have something from 8,200. Just take that as 8,000 BC. That's 10,000 years ago. We have also a seismology event captured in the data from 6,500 BC. We also have right at this 5525 BCE, about 5,300 BCE. Okay. And then, of course, many other locations. So this is a very active zone. Now, I just want to use this opportunity to explain something else, because see, now here what you're seeing. You are seeing seismology event before 5525 BCE. You are seeing seismology event after 25 BCE. Possibly you are seeing a seismology event, if you take that 5,300, right at the time of 5525 BCE. Okay. What is the significance of that? If we go, of course, we know that in a modern science, but thousands and thousands of years ago, the Indic Darshana-Shastra, Nyaya Darshana knows this. Okay, for example, in a Nyaya Darshan, sage Gautama's Nyaya Darshan, okay, the Sutra 1.1.5, okay, is what? Atha Tat Purvakam Trividha Anumanam Purva Vashesha Vat Samanyato Drushtam Cha. Simply think of this as a past, present, and future. Inference, Anumana, is knowledge which is preceded by perception. Of course, it has to be. All inferences are based on perception, as in pratyaksha, empirical knowledge. Pratyaksha, that is objectively testable, that is repeatable, that is reproducible. That's the requirement, guys. Okay, not some individual person's whims, or not somebody's dream, or not somebody's mind, something in somebody's mind, okay, no, that's not acceptable here. It can be an experience of an individual, but we'll not discuss that here, such as in a yoga, such as in the samadhi. But then there are different ways to test the outcome of that experience. Sometime I will address that. But here we are talking purely empirical, hard evidence, okay? In the line of what Shankaracharya said, Jnanam na Jnanam na Purushatantram, kintu Jnanam na Purushatantram, Jnanam na purusha tantram, kintu vastu tantram. Okay, it is empirical. Most of the knowledge, okay, you say aparoksha, like can be perceived with the senses, is empirical. But here the subtlety that you can see is that certain inference is based on a perception. Okay, so the evidence that comes, it may tell us, it may allow us to infer something. That inference could be about the past, could be about the present, or could be about the future. I'll just give you quick two examples. I mean, those are given into wherever I copy pasted this. A priori is the knowledge of effect derived from the perception of its cause. Good example. For example, one seeing the clouds in the sky infers that there will be rain. So which means what? The perception is of the past. Like you saw the things now, and now you're predicting what's going to happen in the future. So if you take inference as a future, then you can take this as an example of a future. A priori, meaning you know the evidence before. A posteriori is the knowledge of a cause derived from the perception of its effect. This is a very good one. Suppose we have in the empirical data, we have the evidence of a flood. Okay, one seeing a river swollen infers that there was a rain. Now, evidence of a flood is going to tell about its cause. Suppose we are after that cause, definitely that happened before the flood. So evidence, the pratyaksha, is of a flood. Based on that, we are going to draw the inference about the past. Looking at the cloud, we are going to draw the inference about the future. And also you can see some pratyaksha, which is happening right now. Meaning right now, meaning whatever the time it happened, that pratyaksha, empirical evidence, happened exactly at the time when that particular thing that is of interest to us was happening. So Anumana is of three kinds in this fashion. This is not the only explanation, but this is one of the explanation why anytime you see an empirical signal, for example, we are looking at the oceanography and flooding, okay, the destruction of Krishna's Dwarka. The sudden, when I say sudden sea level rise, CRE, catastrophic rise event, and I say, yeah, that happened in 5525 BCE, 5525 BCE. But if you look at the data range, you will see as if like, oh, that's going over 500 years, that's going over 200 years, that's going over 100 years, that's going over 50 years, or that's going even longer, like 600 years, maybe plus minus 1,000 years, depending on the quality and the nature of a data. The reason that happens has to do with something like this. The type of evidence that is used, the pratyaksha, empirical, to draw the inference is basically either a priori or a posteriori, or it's just happening coincident with the actual event. This is one reason. You can think of this, again, if you understand statistics, statistical analysis, as spatial cause. So clouds, like something we can name it, clouds, or a river flood, we can name it, or a certain earthquake, we can name it. Now, what can happen, the reason I mentioned this is what can happen is this. In our traditional narrations, possibly documented in the Puranas, I don't know where, and therefore I requested you to bring it to my attention, but I have heard it many times. It's like Krishna warned the Yadus that, look, this our Dwarka is going to get destroyed by sea, okay, or natural calamities or something of that effect. And so why was Krishna saying? Of course, once you say Krishna is a Bhagwan and therefore no questions asked, that's a different story. Okay, that is not the approach I take. But how Krishna, because Krishna himself is saying, if you look at the again, I'm not going to say the right name, but not the Bhagavad Gita, but Upagita, like when Krishna is ready to leave for Dwarka after the Ashwamedha Yajna, after the war, and Arjun says, please, can you tell me Bhagavad Gita again? Because it was in a hurry at that time. And Krishna says, hey, I was also in the trance, I was also in my zone, and I told you that. I may not be able to repeat my performance. But since you asked, let me tell you something. And he tells some related stuff. In that, he says, Tapo balam hi sadhanam. Everything is understood only by tapasya, only by research. Okay. So Krishna is also, when he's saying, again, in Mahabharata, there is a beautiful shlok which says, no matter what you say, whether you say Shabda Praman, whether you say Anuman Praman, whether you say Upaman Praman, whether you say, what is the other Praman? Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upama, yeah, we got most of it. Upapatti, Anupalabdhi, no matter what you discuss, at the end of the day, it is based on a pratyaksha. Everything is a pratyaksha at the end of the day. It may not be your pratyaksha. It may be pratyaksha of that rishi. It may be pratyaksha of that scientist. It may be pratyaksha of that time. Like Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishtha. Today she is not walking ahead of Vasishtha. So how do we understand it? We try to create the pratyaksha of a Vasudev, of whatever that time is. And actually, by our attempt to create that pratyaksha, we get to know about exactly when Mahabharata war happened. That is the beauty. Same thing here. My point is, the fact that there were instances happening, seismological event in 8000 BC, 10,000 years ago, or 6400, which is whatever that time is, or that 5300, that would have even given idea to Krishna that, hey, something is coming. And where we are, like right now, we can say this about many cities, assuming, let's say, the sea levels are still rising. Okay, I will not go into that discussion whether they are truly rising, are they going to go further up than what they have reached. We have a data that they are rising for last 20,000 years. But are they going to rise further significantly? I don't want to get into that discussion. My point is, assuming that is happening, we can say the cities like New York, cities like New Orleans, cities, the place like Netherlands in general, I mean, like Amsterdam, many of the areas of Netherlands, big cities, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai. I mean, these are all in principle in trouble. I mean, we can predict that today, although that has not happened. Based on what we are seeing, the floods that are happening during the monsoon season, rainy season in Chennai or Mumbai and so on, we can make these predictions, okay? Or New Orleans, what happened in New Orleans with the tsunami, not tsunami, what was that? The weather, weather currents and whatnot, few years ago. We can say this. That's how Krishna might have said it. My point is the seismology evidence is there. Also, don't forget the oceanography evidence was also there. So yes, a sudden CRE critical rise event number 3 happened in 5525 BCE, but there were critical rise events happening before. And the Indian civilization with phenomenally sophisticated Sanskrit language, phenomenal tradition of documentation of historical evidence such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, and of course Vedas and other literature and Puranas, and a very stable system language which can communicate the language, communicate the events and instances without losing much meaning, without any drift in the language for thousands of years, the Sanskrit, okay, a artificially created language, and a sophisticated science of astronomy. Astronomy is time. Therefore, they could document this. Okay. For example, in the Mahabharata, when Krishna with Pandavas, meets Bhishma, okay, this is after the Mahabharata war. After they have spent up to a month on the bank of Ganga, then they come to Hastinapur, Yudhishthira Rajyabhishek happens, few things happens, then Krishna, Yudhishthira, everyone goes to meet Bhishma at the Kurukshetra. And right on that first day, which is to say 30 plus 9 days of the war, remaining days of the war since Bhishma fell down, and few additional days have passed away. And at that time, Krishna is saying to Bhishma, Panchashatam Shatcha Kuru Pravira, Tesham Dinanam, Panchashatam Shatcha Kuru Pravira, Shesham Dinanam, Tava Jivitasya. You have additional 56 days to live, which means what? They could predict exactly the day of winter solstice. Based on what? Now, somebody say, oh, it's a Bhagwan Krishna. What is impossible for him? Again, as I said, I do not take that approach. Bhagwan Krishna himself is saying, tapobalam hi sadhanam. Anything is possible only because of tapasya and research. Now, Krishna was such a intellectual individual. That's why we call him Bhagwan, by the way. Okay. And so, of course, he had at his disposal evidence such as the seismology evidence that I'm sharing, but also the oceanography evidence where the sea levels are rising for 20,000 plus years. Or if you go to his time, that is like, say, at least 15,000 years punctuated with critical rise events, sudden sea level rise. So he has seen this. He has access to that knowledge. And based on that, he's also predicting the final destruction of Dwarka, a potential destruction of Dwarka. That's the point. Okay. So again, the Anumana comes in a different forms. The Pratyaksha is always required, but that Pratyaksha might be telling about predicting the future, even in the data that today we look at, oceanography data, seismology data, climatology data, and so on. Okay. Now go back with this information. If this was a new knowledge to you, go back to all the Dr. No Shots, okay, right from the West Indies evidence for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BC. Look at those and look at those data bands, the variation and why they are so. For this reason that I said this is called spatial effect, but then also the way we collect the data, the way the data actually occurs, the evidence actually gets built into the terrestrial, the land, and plus the way the different methods of dating we use, the variation in those methods, the accuracy, precision, and resolution of that methods, combine that with additional intrinsic variation, which is called common cause variation, the variation of the equipment itself, okay, the sensitivity, the resolution of the equipment, that is what causes this variation band, the standard error, and so on. So in a way, I wanted to partially answer your question. Not anybody asked the question, but people, other Mahabharata researchers or researchers in general with a limited to no knowledge of science, they say, I will take that episode one time. Actually, I will find a way to quote that other researcher, and there are many who have said this kind of utterly idiotic things, but I'll take one and show what specific evidence it is in the context of this and explain why that is not to be understood the way they have interpreted. Now, everyone has a right to interpret, but that doesn't mean everyone is right. Some interpretations are completely wrong. Other interpretations are correct. Okay, so that's the point. All right, let's do a quick summary. Seismology evidence shows paleo-seismological indicators in the broad region of Gujarat and thus Krishna's Dwarka for the last 10,000 years. Oceanography evidence, as we are going through this Dr. No Short series for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE, that also shows paleo-oceanography indicators. It doesn't show everything only for 5525 BCE. It shows sudden sea level rise around the world, which coincide with CRE1, catastrophic rise event 1, catastrophic rise event 2, and so on. Now, what some people do, because they don't like 5525 BCE, okay, guess what? They will just try to minimize or downplay the importance of this phenomenal evidence. They will say, yeah, there was a sea rise event, but it was somewhere else. No, they don't understand. Yes, it was there. It is there for last 20,000 plus years. So still, how can we say 5525 BC? Because these are catastrophic rise event, specific events, which are different than a continuous rise of a sea level. Okay, the slope of the line changes, and we have seen that. Oceanography evidence exists for Gujarat regions going back to 20,000 years. This may explain, which is what I already said, traditional or Puranic narrations referring to Krishna warning his kings about the, warning his Yadu dynasty, the Madhus and the other Vansha, related to that broader Yadu Vansha, about the impending flooding and destruction of Dwarka that eventually happened in 5525 BCE. I think that's it. All right. That's all. I will see you shortly in another session of Dr. No Shorts. Namaskar.